The Soul Redeemer, Book 2, Chapter 17, Answers. Nicole recognized that she had been a bit hard on Sam. As she watched him walk toward the barn, she decided she had better go after him and try to build some bridges. She entered the building and waited a minute to allow her eyes to adjust to the darkness. Not wanting to intrude unawares, Nicole called out, "Sam?" The hidden door at the back of the horse stall opened. Sam turned on a light so she could see and motioned for her to join him. As she stepped through the door into the small room jammed full of stuff and dust, he smiled in a surprisingly genuine manner and said, "Welcome to my world, Nicole." He opened a folding chair that had been sitting against the wall and dusted it off with his hand. "I was just about to go back out and find you. I think we've had a difficult beginning, and I'm hoping we can call a truce and start over." Nicole quickly took stock of her surroundings. The room suited him. It was littered with what appeared to be different types of computers and machines. There was a mixture of chaos and order, of old and of new. She had the impression that Sam seemed different somehow here, more confident, in control. She smiled in return and sat down. "I came to tell you the same thing. Please forgive me for being rude, accusing, difficult, and a pea-brain. I really am very thankful you're willing to help me. But why are you helping me?" He sat down behind his large, old, cluttered oak desk and held out a baggie with cookies, some crumbled, some whole. "Before I fill you in, let's break some bread together. Here's to our new start," he said. Nicole didn't think they looked very appetizing and wondered how long they had been sitting in the small, dirty space, but decided that no matter how they tasted, she was going to give 100% to making this new start work. As she took a piece of what she thought might be an oatmeal cookie and put it in her mouth, Sam began. "Okay, lady, I know that this may sound way out there to you, so please just refrain from judging what I'm about to tell you until I'm done, okay?" He raised his eyebrows. "On the other hand, you have experienced some very unusual things lately, so maybe this won't be as hard for you as I thought." She smiled and nodded her head in agreement without saying anything, because the cookie in her mouth was so dry she was having a hard time swallowing it. She wished she had taken a smaller bite. But she was becoming more interested by the moment about what he was going to say, and the cookies became unimportant. Sam took a big bite of cookie and, to Nicole's amazement, continued talking with his mouth full. "Have you heard of the Illuminati?" Nicole swallowed the cookie as best she could and covered her mouth in an attempt to hide the dry remains, then said as clearly as possible, "I've heard of them. They're an elitist organization whose beliefs and rituals can be traced at least as far back as ancient Babylon. Their goal has always been to create a hybrid race of superhumans and to form a one-world government and religion. This, of course, includes destroying anyone or anything that stands in their way. And they're as steeped in the occult as possible." Nicole nodded. "Sounds like Hitler's agenda. Aren't the Illuminati the ones who experiment on people's minds?" "That's a large part of it," he said. "Most people tend to think of them as rich elite, a desirable club, good for promoting business. But it goes much deeper than that. Hitler was key in refining their methodology of controlling people through what's known as trauma-based mind control, where they take a human, break down their victim's psyche, their mind, will, and emotions, and then control them physically as well as mentally. These victims, or slaves as they call them, are so thoroughly brainwashed by severe abuse and trauma that their will is broken and they're able to be programmed to obey orders in response to certain triggers which cause them to switch into a certain mode of operation. Then they're strategically placed in various positions throughout society. The Illuminati have become so adept at creating alters or parts within people's minds that many are never aware of the duality of their own lives and won't have any conscious memory of the things they've done under the influence of the programmers or handlers. They get away with unspeakable things, and their secret affairs are virtually undetectable and untraceable." Nicole said, "You're talking about multiple personality disorder, aren't you?" "Yep," he said. It's now considered dissociative identity disorder because even though it can appear that there are multiple personalities within one person, the identities are created through dissociation or the splitting of one's mind into parts, which occurs under severe trauma and abuse. This disorder doesn't have to be connected with the Illuminati or SRA, satanic ritual abuse. It can happen in people who undergo repeated severe trauma or abuse of any kind and who have the genetic ability to dissociate. This is all very interesting, Nicole said, but what does it have to do with me? I'm not trying to be rude. I just want to get to the bottom of things so I can go home. I understand, but bear with me here. He popped another cookie in his mouth and began simultaneously chewing and talking. I learned the deep truth about the Illuminati when our task force was designed to research some questionable activities within some government agencies. What we discovered is that many of the government officials are members of the Illuminati and certain government agencies have been created as their fronts. I'm not talking conspiracy theory here. I'm talking real stuff. I have proof. He swallowed. I don't believe that my buddies died of natural causes. They died because we had discovered too much. Nicole asked, murdered? Then why aren't you dead too? When Sam gave her a thanks a lot look, she hastily added, I'm really glad you're not, but why them and not you? It's complicated, he said. There are still some officials involved who are not happy about the things that are going on in the shadow government. They're the ones who originally, although indirectly, set up my task force. If they were suspected of being involved in any of that situation, I have no doubt they would be terminated without question. When it got shut down and our team began dying, I believe they intervened, or God did. At any rate, one of them contacted me and asked me to secretly continue my research and investigation, and those who were in opposition to the task force were placated by my so-called retirement. Nicole took note of Sam's reference to God's protection and began to wonder if she had possibly misjudged him in that area as well as others, but decided not to bring it up and risk another conflict. Instead, she asked, It sounds like you and several others are really going out on a limb here and risking your own lives and continuing. Why is it so important to you? What were your findings in regards to the Illuminati that have caused such an uproar? He paused, wondering how much he should say. Okay, lady, I want you to understand that the only reason I'm giving you this information is because you were already involved in it without understanding how. He looked her in the eyes and asked, You aren't going to freak out on me and bail, are you? Where would I go, Sam? She asked. If what you say about me going home and putting my family and others in danger is true, then I'm here until it's safe for me to go. He studied her a moment longer, then began. What I can tell you is that the Illuminati is stepping things up and are rapidly moving toward a strike of some kind. Down through history, they've worked to gain control over the planet and to usher in a one-world government and religion, all under Lucifer's rule. We've uncovered things that would make your skin crawl if I told you about them. They've become very powerful in high places around the world, and especially so here in the complacent, ignorant U.S. We believe they're planning to make a move soon, but we don't know exactly what it is or how they're going to do it. The word strike stood out to Nicole. Why? How do you know this? She asked. Much to her relief, Sam pulled 2 bottles of water out from under his desk and handed one to her. They both took a swig of water before he answered. I have some recordings of conversations that I was able to tap into, among other things. One reason I began tracking you is that I came across a list of targets, and your name was near the top. What kind of a list would I be on? She asked in disbelief as she subconsciously screwed the lid back on her water bottle. It just doesn't make any sense. It was a list of intercessors, he said. Her head snapped up and she looked at Sam questioningly. What? Why? Intercessory prayer is messing with their end-time plans, and you, Nicole, are an intercessor with connections to them. It makes sense from their perspective to start with one of their own. Nicole sat up straight in her chair, looking like she might attack. Excuse me, I am not one of theirs. Sam raised his hand in surrender. You're right, lady. I phrased that wrong. Of course you aren't one of theirs now, but they had planned for you to be. She leaned back, her mind working hard, trying to make sense out of this new information. Were there still pieces of the puzzle of her life that remained out of place? There were things she hadn't made sense of. She had come to terms with the not knowing and was glad that she didn't. She didn't want to accept what Sam was implying if it wasn't true. Yet, if it wasn't true, why was she here? Seeing her struggle, Sam asked, Nicole, were you ever involved in any type of satanic ritual abuse? She looked up. Yes. But that isn't the same as the Illuminati, is it? Not exactly, he said, but they are connected. Let me give you a little background and then see if what I'm saying makes sense to you. She took another drink and tried to relax. The Illuminati is known for their mind control, but what mainstream America doesn't know is that along with tampering inside the human psyche, they're masters in genetic modification and demonology. They are the power behind the transhumanism agenda. Their objective is to improve man's ability to be able to function as super soldiers through gene editing and splicing, even throwing certain animal DNA into the mix. They also introduce demons into a victim's body and soul through a process of layering them in with parts that they can create through splitting the victim's mind. This gives them certain supernatural qualities useful to the masters. Some believe this is possible because demons were once part human themselves and are now disembodied spirits of what was known as the Nephilim, those who were half human and half spiritual being. Nicole said, You're talking about what was happening on Earth before the flood when angels were marrying human women and producing superhuman offspring, aren't you? Yep, Sam replied. I don't think that those angels were only lusting after sex with women, but were also lusting after power and control of the earth. I believe that their hope was in their children, the Nephilim or giants. Satan knew that God had a plan to redeem his people, and that it had something to do with blood. By corrupting human bloodlines, he would not only be able to control the earth, but he would stop God's plan of redemption. That makes sense, Nicole said. Sam nodded. Demons have no bodies and are strictly spirits. However, because at one time they did have a human body, they crave the things of the flesh and are always looking for physical bodies in which they can dwell. But the principalities are angels that have their own spiritual bodies and can even take on different forms and appearances. Nicole asked, Are you inferring that what was happening in Noah's day has something to do with what's happening now? You got it, Sam answered. Satan's been working on corrupting human bloodlines, changing human DNA, and recreating a superhuman race ever since the beginning of time. This is where the Illuminati come in. Their goal is to create a hybrid race through genetic alterations in DNA, along with incorporating AI or artificial intelligence into the flesh, who will be able to host powerful demonic spirits that will allow them to function with superhuman capabilities and supernatural knowledge and power. A complete takeover of humanity on every level. Sam continued. Freemasons and Satanists work together with the Illuminati as part of the same network or brotherhood, and they often overlap and interact with one another. However, the Illuminati are the elite, the top of the hierarchy, in part because many hold positions of power and financial wealth, but also because many are descendants of specific ancient bloodlines. Of course, there's still a hierarchy within the Illuminati, and often those in the lower echelons are simply slaves to those operating in power. But they all consider themselves keepers of the great plan, which is to bring in the New World Order. Masons share the same goal of establishing this great plan, and those within the top levels of Masonry may also hold positions within the Illuminati. Neither of these groups see themselves as Satanists, even though they worship Lucifer, but they're all part of the occult. Satanism has a different history, but they all use many of the same symbols, occult practices and rituals such as blood and human sacrifice, drugs, mind-splitting trauma, which creates altars to use for their own purposes, and demonic possession. Nicole nodded. I'm just thinking back over my life. My Uncle Marcus was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he was at the rituals. He had a very strong hold on me that was hidden deeply inside my mind until Jesus revealed the demonic strong man and broke the soul ties with him. Sam commented, So, it is possible that your uncle was a part of, or at least under orders of the Illuminati, which would position you as a potential target. He was also aware of Marcus's role in Nicole's life, but he didn't know how much she knew. Maybe, Nicole consented. But I thought that their M.O. was to do a bunch of experiments on kids in secret hospitals. Sam affirmed, "Unfortunately, that's true. They will access parents who agree to allow their children to participate in what they think are government experiments, not knowing the ramifications for the individuals or society. But some are targeted through the passing of the baton, generational and ancestral bloodlines, along with the recognition of those who are naturally sensitive to the spiritual realm and who have an elevated ability to dissociate." Nicole thought out loud. "I'm pretty sure that I wasn't involved in any governmental experiments." Sam asked, "Is there a chance you could have DID?" "I did," she said, "but the Lord helped me work through it, and my dissociated parts have been healed, delivered, and integrated." "Well, I'm glad you were able to overcome," he said. "It's pretty much impossible without God's help." She couldn't resist the question any longer. "So, Sam, you have quoted the Bible and you talk about God and Satan. I didn't think you were a Christian. What gives?" "I never said I wasn't a Christian," Sam said as he popped a whole cookie in his mouth, chewed a few times, and washed it down with water. "You assumed that I wasn't, but I'm a believer in Jesus and the truth of God's Word. He dealt a lot with demons." "Yes, he did," she said, "and still does." In looking back, Nicole could see how she had been projecting her fear and frustration onto Sam, and how it had skewed the way she viewed him. Come to think of it, he had shown her nothing but kindness and compassion. "I'm a bigger pea-brain than I thought, Sam. Please forgive me. It seems as if I've been wrong about a lot of things where you're concerned. I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions, and that I was so quick to judge you." Sam waved off her apology. "I'm used to it. I know I'm not the best in the public relations department, and as a Christian, I don't seem to fit into the mainstream line of doctrine and theology of most churches. Maybe it's because of my perspective. I don't know." "I do understand," Nicole said. "We have more in common than I thought." He suddenly looked intently at her. "That is more true than you could possibly imagine." He whirled his chair around, and while opening his filing cabinet, he asked, "Nicole, what do you know about your grandparents and your great-grandparents on your mother's side?" "Not a lot. I know my granddad had a bad relationship with his stepmother, who happened to have the same name as me, by the way, and he left home at an early age because of that. I know less about my granny, but she loved me." "I don't know. What exactly are you asking?" Sam picked up a large file and plopped it down on the desk in front of Nicole. "Do you want to know why I came after you instead of someone else, besides the fact that your name was one of the first on the list?" Nicole's mind was reeling with anticipation. "Yes, of course." Sam tapped on the full file folder. "In my research, I discovered that my family's lineage was linked with the early Illuminati and occult here in the States. I discovered names of others who were a part of the same, and your family was one of those. In fact, your grandfather and my grandmother had the same father." He paused a moment, watching her face. Nicole was listening and trying to make sense of what he was saying. "So you're telling me that my grandparents were involved in the occult and that you and I are related?" He answered, "Well, not your grandparents, just your great-grandmother, Sophia, and I wouldn't say that she was involved in the occult, however. She was born into an Illuminati family. But basically, yes and yes, that's what I'm saying." Because her thoughts were so all over the place, the only thing Nicole could think to say was, "But I thought you were related to Samuel Adams." "I am," he said, "but that's the other side of the family. Your great-grandfather was Hans, and your great-grandmother was Sophia. They had a son named David, your grandfather. Sophia died, and Hans married Nicole, my great-grandmother. Hans and Nicole had a daughter named Donna, my grandmother. Your grandfather David was my grandmother's half-brother. Donna's the one who married into the Samuel Adams family." He was quiet for a moment as she tried to make sense of what he was saying, and then continued, "I've been watching the movements of the network and deduced that they had targeted you. I figured they'd be making a move soon, and that's why I decided to track you." She closed her eyes, trying to logically think through what Sam had just shared, but her thoughts were swirling with confusion and chaos. She went into the tabernacle inside her mind, and the swirling stopped. Jesus, is this true? It answers so many of my questions, but I don't want it to be true. Jesus put his hand on her shoulder and said, Nicole, truth sets you free. All will be well. Just trust me. When she opened her eyes, she said, I believe what you're saying about my family being linked with the Illuminati or occult, and actually it makes a lot of sense. I guess something like that's never easy to hear, and in some ways it's kind of like being punched in the gut. In the back of my mind, I guess I've always hung onto a strand of hope that none of my memories are real. False hope, I see now, as you've come along with evidence that proves differently. She suddenly smiled. But on the other hand, we're related. So, like, what are we? Cousins how far removed? Sam bit into another cookie and replied, Just second cousins. Nicole grinned, held out her hand, and said, Well, hey there, cuz. Glad to know you. Sam brushed the crumbs off his hands and then took hold of the one she was extending across the desk. Nicole squeezed it hard, and suddenly her face took on a serious look. Cousin Sam, thank you for rescuing me. I could just hug you. Sam swallowed, yanked his hand out of hers, and disgustedly said, See? Now that's what I don't want. Don't you go getting all sentimental. I should have listened to my gut instincts and not ever told you about our relationship. He looked flustered, then reiterated, I don't mean relationship. We don't have a relationship. Well, not more than a genetic one anyhow. He indirectly looked over at Nicole from the corner of his eyes and saw that she was watching him and enjoying his discomfort. I hate tears, he said, and if you cry, I'll put you on the plane back to Samaria and let those dogs eat you alive. Nicole laughed. Wow! Okay then, my cousin, I'll try not to cry. But how long before I can go home? He responded, Look, lady, like I told you before, just call me Sam. And I wish I could tell you when you could go home, but it'll depend on a lot of things. We're working on it, but have some patience here. Nicole said, By we, I assume you mean the good people who are on your side that hired you. He nodded, and she asked, What's the plan, Sam? He looked at her for a moment as if he were studying her and measuring her strength. She looked steadily back at him. After a moment he asked, Don't you think you've taken in enough information for now? She was disappointed and frustrated. Sam, I want to go home. There's a woman in my house and in my bed, and my husband believes she's me. You won't let me just go home and kick her out. You say that there's a plan in place to fix this. I want to know what's being done about this and what I can do to help.